Gentlemen in the audience, staff members and members of the committee, we're going to call the meeting to order. Have we got this? Can everyone hear me? It doesn't seem like it's on, but maybe it is. Oh, that sounds better. That sounds better. Okay, welcome committee members. We have three members of the committee that are not in attendance tonight. Councillors Miller, Pierce, and Bell are unable to be with us as they are traveling out of town, I believe. But everyone else is here, so welcome. The agenda is before you. Would someone move that the agenda as amended be approved? Brian, seconded by Joan. Are there any additions to the agenda? There are a couple changes to the agenda. I'm told that there is no general manager's update for operations, so we'll strike that. And there is no general manager's update for development services. We'll strike that as well. We have a delegation listed. Ella Haley is not here. If she is not here at the appropriate time when she's called and comes later, we will slot that delegation in under other business, if that's the consensus of the committee. And other than that, I believe that I'm prepared to call the question on the amended agenda being approved. All those in favor? The motion's carried. If you have a declaration of pecuniary interest, declare it. Seeing none, we have a presentation this evening. With us is our Integrity Commissioner, Commissioner Munro. She is going to make a presentation. We're going to try and hold it to about 15 minutes, including the questions. And I've ran that by the Integrity Commissioner beforehand, so don't feel that if you have questions that we'll get timed out, but we'll try and hold it to 15 minutes. So, having said that, Commissioner Munro, if you could introduce yourself and make your presentations, and I would ask that the committee members just hold their questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll open it up to the committee.
Good evening, members of Council. My name is Melinda Munro, and I've been the Integrity Commissioner here since the fall of 2017. So we're just going into the last 9 months of my tenure as your Integrity Commissioner, which will end in October, obviously subject to whether you decide to reappoint me or not. So tonight I have 3 items that I'm going to be reporting to you on. The first one is just my annual report of the activities in the last year. Then we're going to talk about the changes to the Code of Conduct that are coming, both consequent to the recent legislation from the province, but also some clarifications and fixing some of the grammatical things that we need to fix. And then finally, I'll talk to you about an advisory that I've drafted for you on social media usage, just as a way to avoid potential issues in the future. As some of you know, we had a very significant issue last year with respect to social media, and so we want to avoid that in future. So the first is there's just a very small 2-page report, which is my annual report from my activities last year. One of the things that is mentioned in the Municipal Act is that the opportunity for me to provide education or training activities for County Council. I have not been asked to do that so far in my tenure, but it is something that is available to you should you want that. I wasn't asked to provide any written advice in the formal way that's provided for in the code, but that again is something that should you want that, I can do that. There were 2 inquiries about code violations last year, and in both of those, 2 simple ones. In both cases, I advised the complainants that they didn't amount to proper code violations. And then, of course, there was the 1 formal complaint about disrespectful behavior on social media that went to a very significant, as you recall, meeting and was finally resolved. And then there was an informal one about the use of social media, and that was resolved for the very congenial meeting between the 2 individuals. And then finally, I had 1 small request about a possible conflict of interest where someone had a member of their family who worked for Brant County. And they were being asked to step down on any kind of decision that was financial because their family member might benefit from a budget decision in some very kind of distant way. And my advice to them was that that did not, in general, form a conflict of interest, where it was a specific question that they were actually voting on something that was related to that person's actual salary, they would need to step away. But if it was just a decision to build a road and that the spending of money on the road might change the budget allocation for something else, that was not a conflict of interest that needed to be declared. And then the last thing I did was simply work on these amendments to the code that we're going to talk about later tonight. So any questions about the overall report for 2017-2018? All right. So the code of conduct, you've got two pieces of information there. You've got my report, which is the easy summary of what we're talking about changing, and then you have the actual new proposed code of conduct. So what I propose to do is just go through the slides, and if you have any questions about either the report or the draft code, then you can ask me those. So there are three types of amendments we're making to the code of conduct. The first one is just housekeeping amendments. So, for example, I have capitalized all the definitions so that it's easier to figure out whether something's a defined term. We've also taken out some duplicate sections. For example, one of the sections defined confidential information twice, and so we've taken that out. So that's pretty straightforward sort of housekeeping amendments. I've also put in the amendments related to the changes to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So those amendments relate to my role as Integrity Commissioner under that act. And then finally, and we'll spend a little time on this, changes to the harassment provisions in order to clarify the jurisdiction of the Integrity Commissioner. So on the housekeeping things, I mentioned the definitions. Under the gifts and benefits section, which was section 8, it wasn't clear that there were two types of gifts that could cause a problem. One was receiving a single gift of $250, and the other one was receiving a series of gifts equaling $250 from the same person. Both of those would be considered a potential violation of the gifts and benefits section. So that was just a bit of clarification. Under the investigations, one of the issues that arose, or that I felt was a problem under the investigations, was there were a lot of timelines for the complainant and respondent to respond to, but not really any for the Integrity Commissioner to respond to, and that struck me as somewhat unfair. So that if a complainant has to file within a certain number of days, it didn't say to the Integrity Commissioner that they had a limited number of days they had to acknowledge that there was a complaint. And so I felt that needed to be put in. So that's what I've done there. So I have to respond within 14 days, and I have to exchange documents within a certain limited amount of time. The next thing I changed there, or proposed to change, is that the first report to council was supposed to happen within 90 days. But by the time the complaint comes in, and then I have to look at it, then it's 2 weeks to the respondent and 2 weeks back. You're getting so close to that 90 days that virtually nothing is ever done by the 90-day deadline. And if there's extensions because of holidays or people are sick. So I've proposed to change that so that the first report happens at 180 days, but hopefully the complaint is also resolved by that time as well. So that's the idea, is to not waste time having an interim report at 90 days when it seemed like nothing had ever happened by the time 90 days rolled around. I've included some expanded role for the Integrity Commissioner to amend timelines. That was always the case, but it's now clear that if I feel that because someone's sick or because someone's away or whatever, I can extend timelines. So that's now clear that I have the ability to do that. There was a section that says if a complainant abandons a complaint, it's to be treated as abandoned. And I think that's appropriate. What I've put in is that the Integrity Commissioner can inquire into whether that was fair, that the complaint wasn't abandoned because someone was bullied or because they were pressed. So I can ask some questions, and if I believe that it's been abandoned fairly, then I can just declare it as abandoned. There's a section there, the second to last bullet point takes us back to last year when we had the most interesting evening of legal counsel on all sides with respect to an Integrity Commissioner complaint. So the new Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, you'll have had some orientation on that. Historically, any pecuniary interest meant that the councillor had to recuse themselves and leave the room. And that included if the pecuniary interest was because they were being disciplined and that they were going to lose some pay. And that meant that a councillor who was being disciplined was not able to defend themselves in the council meeting. And that came up a number of times in complaints that I've dealt with over the last few years. The province has amended the act so that if you're being disciplined, and the only reason you have a pecuniary conflict of interest is because you're being disciplined, that's no longer treated as a conflict of interest in quite the same way. So you now have the right to be in the meeting and to speak and defend yourself. So what happened last spring was that the councillor, I always took the view that that was the only fair approach, and that was what I would accept, notwithstanding what the old act used to say. But now it's formal. So last spring we had a situation where we had legal counsel who wanted to be a delegation at the meeting and spoke for several minutes on the issues related to the complaint. What I've put in the Code of Conduct is a section that it says very clearly that you as a body have the right to decide whether you're going to allow legal counsel to appear or not. So that you can choose to tell whoever the complainant is or the respondent is, no legal counsel as delegations, because we have an integrity commissioner who is giving us advice, who has written a report and done an independent investigation. We're not going to have a new trial on the facts in front of council with lawyers on all sides. Conversely, you could choose to say we're going to have legal counsel present either for the complainant or the respondent, and you could have a whole, essentially a new trial on the matter. Hopefully not. It's part of the reason you have an integrity commissioner. But I've made it clear in the Code of Conduct what those roles are, and so that you have the right to choose. I think previously it was unclear whether council had the right to do that, and now you do. And then finally, the other housekeeping amendment there is that the previous Code of Conduct talked about the election period. The new law is very clear. If I'm investigating a complaint, when the election writ is dropped or nomination day happens, I am not to continue investigating, and the complaint is considered abandoned unless the complainant brings it back after the election. And that's new. So those are the housekeeping matters. Any questions about those? So around the Conflict of Interest Act and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act amendments. So under the previous Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, if a member of the public thought that you had a pecuniary interest and you had failed to disclose it, and you stayed in a meeting and you voted, they could go to court and ask for a judge to have a ruling, and the punishment was as serious as removing you from your seat. What this new legislation does is it takes that role and it gives it, the public can still do that, or they can make a complaint to me, I do the investigation, and then if I believe that the act has been violated, I take it to court. So it doesn't come back to you for a decision on that. I do the investigation, and if I believe the act has been violated, then I apply to a court for a ruling as to whether you should be able to remain in your seat or not. So that's new, and it's a sort of pretty significant new role for the Integrity Commissioner. The Code of Conduct treats them identically, so there's no different form to fill in, there's no different timing for the number of days you have to submit it or how many days you have to respond to it. All of that remains exactly the same. It's just that at the end, I don't make a report to you, I make a report to a judge if I believe that there's been a violation. If there's been no violation, then I issue written reasons as to why I don't believe there's a violation, and that's the end of it. So that's the change with respect to that. It doesn't change anything with respect to what we call non-pecuniary interests. So the Code of Conduct, and this next slide's, whoops, I just turned it off, there we go. The Code of Conduct actually speaks to more than just a pecuniary conflict. You can be considered to be in a violation of your Code of Conduct if you have more of a perceived conflict of interest or a kind of personal conflict of interest. And I discussed that with a couple of members recently. If you are a member of a committee and that committee is applying for some kind of special dispensation from council, just because you personally aren't going to be getting any money, you might still be perceived by the public to be in a conflict, and it's best to actually declare that and to step back. You don't necessarily have to leave the meeting, but to step back so there's no perception that you're actually making a decision that's benefiting one person over another because of a personal interest. It's not a violation of the law, but it is potentially a violation of the code. So I would just caution you to be aware of those situations. And this is just an example of that. A person can make a complaint under the code where the conflict's more general, not just financial. So it's best to either give me a call, just drop me an email and ask me what I think. And under the code, you can ask me for formal advice. So you fill in the form, send it to me, and I will fill in, and I will write back a formal letter confirming one way or the other. And that binds me so that I can't find you in a violation of the code if it turns out I was wrong. So finally, we're on to the last big change to the Code of Conduct. So under the previous Code of Conduct, it was unclear if the Integrity Commissioner had jurisdiction in an employee harassment situation. And that was because harassment is covered broadly in the code and ordinarily would be considered in the jurisdiction of the Integrity Commissioner, but there was a previous section that said it was excluded. So what we've done is take that out, or what I'm proposing is to take that out, and to provide basically a parallel process for employees who claim to be harassed by a councillor or a member of a local board. So what the employee can do is they can either go to the manager of HR and through the respectful workplace process have an investigation done, or they can apply under the Code of Conduct, or they can do both. And should they choose to do both, I will hold my process in abeyance while the HR process is underway. And if the HR process is done properly and well, but they still feel as if they need the Integrity Commissioner to recommend some discipline, I can take a look at what's been done there and I can adopt it, or I can do my own investigation if I think it's necessary. But it gives the employee, it doesn't deny the employee the opportunity to use the Code of Conduct, but it prevents us from having two parallel investigations going at the same time. So that proposal clears up that issue about the whether or not the Integrity Commissioner has jurisdiction on harassment complaints. And those of you who were here 2 years ago when we dealt with the significant harassment issue, that was one of the problems that we had to wrestle with, was what to do with the fact that we had a big and very well done investigation done by a harassment investigator, and then a complaint came to the Integrity Commissioner as well. So now we know what to do. We have the steps in the proposed changes. So that is the proposed changes to the Code of Conduct. Any questions, Your Worship, for members of council about those changes?
Just if I might, I'll go to you in a second, Joan, just for correction. I'm not a worship. Here's the worship. I'm just a regular councillor.
You're acting worship.
So I appreciate the promotion, but and having said that, just to be clear, the amendments that you are proposing for the Code of Conduct, my assumption is that staff will incorporate that into a revised Code of Conduct, and that will be presented to the council for approval.
Correct. It already has been done, so there is a draft with all of those changes. If council doesn't wish to adopt any particular ones, then we can simply take those out.
Okay. And Joan has a question as well.
The little chart that was up there when you talked about, you had a question about a group. So just to be clear, if you're a member of a group, say the Lions Club or the Optimists or whatever, and they ask for a grant from council for a project, should you declare a conflict of interest? Is that, I mean, it's for the common good, and you're not benefiting directly, personally, but should you declare a conflict since you are a member of that particular group?
So Section 4 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act would say that if your interest is a similar interest to a broad group, like the Optimists, for example, then it wouldn't necessarily be a conflict of interest. So that's typically the rule. So the concern would be that there's new law developing on this. So there were some new cases just this year. And of course, some councils are more litigious than others and they sue each other over these kinds of things. So it's slightly up in the air. So I would say if it were a situation where you were actually the treasurer, or you were in some role where you might personally have more benefit than someone else, ask me in advance, and we'll actually make sure we go through the law and make sure that there's no potential issue there. But in general, no, it shouldn't be perceived that way from the purposes of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Now, having said that, the Code of Conduct talks about, this is why I have the diagram there, perceived or apparent conflicts. And if, for example, the Optimist Club and the Kinsman Club were applying for the same grant, and you were a member of the Optimist Club voting on which of the two clubs should get the grant, it's possible members of the community might find that somewhat troublesome, and someone might want to make a complaint. In those kinds of cases, I would suggest you declare those conflicts and as a body decide how you're going to deal with them in each of the instant cases.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, first Mark and then Steve.
So there are some times when we're approached as members of council and also just members of the community to become a dues-paying member of a local organization, such as, you know, the Brant Railway Museum or something like that. Are you saying then that, say they were to come to council for a grant or some sort of ruling in their favor, it would be enough to be able to say, you know, I'm a member of this, even if I'm not on the exec, I don't have some special role, I just pay my $25 a year, to say that I'm a member, see if there's any issue from council as a whole to allow me to actually vote, or should I step away from voting?
I would say the former. What some communities have adopted, some integrity commissioners have recommended, and you might want to consider that here, is to have what they call kind of an advisory. So if you really, a situation like just being a dues-paying member of an organization is probably going to be covered by Section 4, and you're fine, not to worry. But if you feel like maybe this is a little bit different than the standard being a member of a club, is to have a way of just doing an advisory to council, which we say, some people might think this is a conflict. I don't believe it's a conflict. Here is the reasons why I don't believe it's a conflict, and put it out there so that if anyone questions you, you've actually done the analysis in a way that's transparent.
So an advisory, like an email to other members of council?
An email, or just even a statement at the beginning of the meeting when the conflicts are being declared.
Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Yeah, mine was kind of in the same direction, only slightly different. If I'm on a county committee, like the Heritage Committee, and the Heritage Committee is applying to council for funding for a special project, should I be stepping away from the decision on, no, right?
Those are clearly covered by Section 4 of the Act. And you probably, I think what sometimes happens is more that you agree with the Heritage Committee that they should get the grant, and then on council you vote against them, and that gets people's backs up. But no, that would be clearly covered by Section 4 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act.
Okay, if I might, I'm just going to allow her to continue, and then we'll come back with that.
Oh, okay. So my last point, that on the, is just to move on from there to the social media advisory. This is the first time I've issued an advisory for council, and I've done it because we've recently had a couple of questions come up around social media, and then I had a few informal questions this evening. So it seemed like it was a timely matter. But this is something I can also do for you if there are issues that come up. You have general questions over time and you think this is enough, we have enough questions on this, let's get an advisory from the Integrity Commissioner. Because this assists you, so if someone makes a complaint about what you're doing, you can point to the advisory and say, well, the Integrity Commissioner told me it would be okay if I did this. And it maybe heads off some things early on. So the social media advisory is essentially just some descriptions of social media, how they're used. There's no attempt here to try and discourage you from using it. In fact, it's a very good tool for politicians to use. It's a good way to get public engagement. It's just that it is fraught with danger, and there are, if you look at Section 6 of the advisory, a number of sections of the Code of Conduct that you can stumble on if you're not using your social media thoughtfully. So Section 14 is important, and we spoke about this informally with a couple of you this evening. A member's social media account is the one you need to be sort of most concerned about. That's where you're identifying yourself as a member, you're receiving questions, you're engaging with the public in your capacity as a member. You're also potentially using Brant County resources, so staff to help you, or you're using your Brant County email for that. And in those cases, for sure, you have to be absolutely in compliance with the Code of Conduct. With personal Facebook pages or Twitter accounts and things like that, the rules are slightly less tight, except that as long as people know who you are, if you're behaving badly on social media, it could result in a code of conduct complaint, which is what happened last year, which is a personal Facebook account, but it was clearly being used as both a personal account and as a public, I'm a county council member account. So you need to be cautious in those situations about what you do. And then it's also important in election season, and those are the questions I had tonight. Your Facebook account that says vote Melinda Monroe and Melinda Monroe County Councillor need to be separate from one another, because during election season you're operating in both capacities, and you're raising money on one and you're raising issues, and you might be debating council decisions on one in a capacity that you're not permitted to do on the other. So my recommendation would be to have those be separate, and that's also discussed in that advisory. And I think the thing to take home from the advisory in general is, when in doubt, don't. If you think that it's dodgy, that what you're about to post or debate about, then just turn it off and walk away. Blocking people. I don't have this in the advisory directly, but I brought it up because it has come up recently. It's poor practice to block people on social media, even if they're unpleasant. However, if they are violent or if they are threatening hatred against others, then I would recommend getting in touch with the police and getting in touch with the platform to have something done about it there, rather than just blocking people that are irritating or blocking people that have views that are contrary to yours or who post at you several times an hour. It's a problem, but it's not something that, it's not necessarily appropriate to block people. So that's it on all three of those things.
Okay, Mark has a question?
Sure, thank you. Through you, you're somewhat worshipped for this moment. I have three questions. Two are really brief. One, what if the issue you have with the person is that they're threatening or violent in real life, and then you block them from your social media? So you see them at the parking lot and they say, hey, I'm going to beat you up for X, Y, or Z. Are you able to block them from your political page?
Yes,
real life?
I think that would be appropriate. You might want to, make some notes about that, and of course report to the police if anyone's threatening you. But yes, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Two, what about pecuniary interest as it relates to the value of your home? For example, I live on Willow Street, Steve lives on Silver Street. Should we be declaring that if we're talking about public works that are on those streets or that direct area?
No, that would be covered by Section 4 as well, because you have the same interest as everybody on the street.
Right.
Now, if you were, going about your business trying to inappropriately get a development built on your street in order to bring up the value of your house, I think people are going to start,
Right.
Asking questions. But if it's just putting in a new sewer or a new road, that's Section 4 would cover it.
Okay, and just for some clarity about communications more broadly than just social media, when we look at email or social media, phone, voicemail, contact numbers, information, should we have separate ones for personal, for our county role, and then for our campaign, or when it's an election time?
Well, you're not permitted under the Code of Conduct, you're not permitted to use county resources for your campaign. So you can't use your Brant County email for your election campaign, or you can use your Brant County issued cell phone, Facebook pages, none of those things. You have to use your own personal resources for those things.
Now, what about using our personal resources? Like, a lot of us have our personal phone numbers as our contact information on the county website,
Yeah, so you can do that in reverse.
but not the other way.
But not the other way.
So if my personal number is used as my county contact, I can also use it for my campaign number.
That's a really good question, because it's not really the case you should do that with your social media. If you're using your social media, you shouldn't be, if you're advertising your personal webpage on your county business cards, it becomes a county, what do they call it, the member social media account. If you're using your personal phone number on your county business cards, it starts to look like it's your county official phone number and not your personal phone number. So it's kind of dodgy. I would say if you can separate them, do. And if you can't, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Or ask me a formal question and I will render a formal opinion with the case law attached.
Thank you so much.
Okay, keeping in mind that Integrity Commissioner is available for questions at any time through email or otherwise, are there any final questions before we thank her for the presentation and move on? Okay, then let me thank you for coming all the way down here and then making the presentation. And again, if committee members have any questions, I know you're more than willing to answer them at any time. So, thank you, Commissioner Monroe. And we can move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is Ella Haley is here to speak regarding the proposed changes to the growth plan. And as Ella is moving forward, I'd just remind everyone in the audience and anyone else for that matter to turn their cell phones off and please follow the rules of decorum. No clapping, no jeering, no obnoxious behavior, all that kind of stuff. And if you do, I don't know what'll happen to you, but it won't be good. So I ask you to respect the delegation as she has 10 minutes to make her presentation.
Sorry, just a moment. We're just having a technical problem here. Okay, if I plant myself on this, just a moment. Is that okay? Oops. Just kidding. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for hearing my concerns tonight. I gave you a summary of my points. It's in your package. I'll go through those points. But I wanted to just preface it with a few minor points. I feel that we need more time, that you need more time. I feel that there's a lot coming at us with all kinds of changes proposed by the provincial government. And while I appreciate the staff's report, I feel that it's premature to make a decision on the part of council tonight. I think that there needs to be more information. There was a meeting a week ago, Monday, in St. Catharines. Council did ask staff to invite us. We were not invited. Finally, Sunday afternoon, we started calling around and were invited by mid-afternoon. And so 2 of us went to the meeting in St. Catharines. So it would be nice if farm groups, including the National Farmers Union, that's my farm group, OFA was there, but NFU was not there. I don't think Christian farmers were there. Cordelia, who led the discussion, said that they were well advanced in their meetings. They'd had meetings in the fall. And so I went to her and I said, I feel that we are Johnny-come-lately, that we are late to the party. And I feel that there's a lot of new councillors on the council as well. And we were given worksheets. We worked solidly for 3 hours, but you as councillors haven't worked with these sheets. And so I just feel that you yourselves need a teach-in. And so we're trying to help make that happen for you. We're bringing in one of the former top advisors, planners for the province, Victor Doyle. He's coming to speak in Paris on Monday, February 25th. And so he's speaking to these amendments. So we're trying to provide resources for you, and we hope that you can come. I did send the invitation. I don't know if it's in the package, Heather. Is it? Yeah, okay, thank you. So you have the invitation. There's also a teach-in on Wednesday in Langford. We tried to move the meetings around so that different audiences, different populations can come to these meetings. The Ontario Farmland Trust is participating. When we did attend, Joan Telfer Fox and I attended in St. Catharines on last Monday. There was representation from the OFA, and our staff, our county staff, did hear that there were real concerns from the farming community. We had a woman who was on the board of directors for the Hamilton OFA, Hamilton Wentworth OFA, Kathy McMaster, and she spoke quite strongly about the need to protect land and that this in fact threatens farmland. And so I don't see that. That was in the discussion in our workshop last week, but I don't see that in the report, this concern about the threat to farmland. So I feel, I'm just asking if you might look at this as a draft, but a draft that could be looked at and worked with, and if you could come to our teach-in on the 25th, especially in Paris. They're trying to make it really accessible for you. Okay. I just feel when I looked around the room and I spoke to Cordelia, I didn't see environmental groups there, really. I saw conservation authorities. I saw a lot of staff. It was a regional meeting, so a lot of staff from Niagara, our area, Hamilton, St. Catharines, but I didn't see the other farm groups. I didn't see environmental groups. And so I feel that these other groups should be part of this discussion as the government is listening. So I'll just go through here for a moment. And this is coming from myself as a farmer and somebody who works to protect farmland. And so I'm looking at the amendment through those eyes. I feel that it would weaken, the proposed changes will weaken or eliminate some important provincial planning rules that are designed to prevent sprawl. It would allow municipal urban boundary expansions without solid evidence of need. It would be easier for municipalities to create more urban sprawl. And we've just gotten through Bill 66, so it's more or less quite similar themes to Bill 66. It would weaken density targets. It would allow for more low-density sprawl. Low density means more growth on farmland. Compact communities means less growth on farmlands. Urban boundaries would be allowed to expand onto farmland. This could easily be influenced by developers, and this threatens the local farming economy. Employment lands would be allowed to be converted to residential. This underscores the fact that there's currently in place employment lands in excess of demand. This means that employment lands could become residential sprawl. This would allow for a massive farmland grab. It would allow precious farmland to be converted to employment land, without the absence of a demonstrated need for more employment land in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And this ignores the fact that farmland is employment land. We hire people, we feed the economy. It's the key basis of the Brant County economy. Agriculture drives the economy. We are employment land, and it's precious land that needs to be protected for farming. There's not much in there at all. There's no mention really of affordable housing. The Amendment 1, it's said to help provide more housing, but there's no changes in there as far as affordable housing. Climate change is stripped from the growth plan. It used to be in the growth plan. It's removed. There's no mention whatsoever now of climate change. And transit station density, I didn't address that because it's not really in the ballpark for Brant County. But overall, the proposed changes fail to address the Greater Golden Horseshoe's affordable housing problem. It favors costly low-density sprawl. And we need more stringent protection of farmland. We don't need more sprawling subdivisions. So I'm asking council to slow down, to take a pause, to come to our teach-in. We know you're busy. We're trying to provide some resources for you. I'm just asking if you could slow down and not favor the low-density sprawl and anything that threatens farmland or the local farming economy. Thank you.
And thank you, Ella, not only for your comments and your concerns, but for the invitation as well. Are there any questions of clarification to the delegation at this point? Steve?
Through you, actually to you, Mr. Chair. My question is, later on in section 9D, staff reports, will Rob Trotter be presenting his report, or will we just be receiving the document?
We'll follow the normal procedure whereby I assume that everyone has read the report.
Yep.
And I will place the report before the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Again, questions of clarification to the delegation? Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if it's a clarification, but
It's going to have to be.
I assume through you that you have read the staff report?
Yes, I have it right here, all marked up. Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you still have all these concerns?
I do. I don't see any mention of concern about farmland in that document. I don't see it.
Thank you.
Okay, again, to the delegation, clarification. Mark?
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, having gone to the St. Catharines event, I asked a member of staff about affordable housing talk, said there was none. I'll ask you, because we won't get a presentation later, was there any talk about, at that meeting, about infrastructure for rural communities to service this potential sprawl?
There was even talk of P3s. There was talk. Somebody was there from the Brantford Chamber of Commerce wanting the Transportation Infrastructure suggesting P3s.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, once again, thank you,
You're welcome.
Dr. Haley, and we will deal with the presentation right now. How do you wish to deal with the presentation? A motion to receive would be in order. Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Wheat. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And there is a report, as you know, Ella, later on the evening, staff report that we will be dealing with. The minutes of the previous meeting were circulated. Would someone move the minutes? It's moved by Mayor David, seconded by John. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. The minutes are adopted. There is no business arising from the minutes, and that takes us to the consent items. You will notice that the consent items 7A and 7B are before you. 7A are items that include recommendations, and item B are items that are to be received. Would anyone like any of those removed for action? Seeing none, would someone move that the consent items to be approved, and the consent items to be received, be received? Mayor David, seconded by Joan. All those in favor? Motion's carried. That takes us to committee reports, which there are none. And that takes us to staff reports, which we have a few. First of all, the Corporate Services General Manager's update. And as Robin is moving to the microphone, just a reminder that the Operations General Manager's update has been deleted because there is no update at this time. Proceed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just have a few items tonight. I just wanted to let you know that the Finance and IT Division are investigating methods of consolidating our debit machine payments to provide a better customer experience. The Corporate Services and Marketing Division are looking into options for standardizing the contact number for the city, or sorry, for the county, and will be bringing a report to CDC in the spring. And lastly, staff have been evaluating the budget process this year to see what we could do better next year, and we welcome any input that you may have.
Are there any questions to the General Manager? Seeing none, just a comment from myself. I would like to thank your department as the lead on the budget process. It went very well this year, in my opinion, and we are on to other things. The budget has been passed, so it's been a success. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the Community and Protective Services, and the Director, or the General Manager, sorry, is moving forward. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of updates for committee. One noting that this month is Winter Active Month, and every day this month, a variety of free or low-cost activities are taking place throughout the county, including our annual Recreation Expo. The Rec Expo is happening on Saturday, February 23rd at the Brant Sports Complex. This annual event provides an opportunity for the community to do one-stop shopping for recreational and sports registration information needs. There is a full listing of all the organizations participating in this event on the county's website. And finally, the contractor for the new county OPP building is beginning to prepare the site for the new build. There will be a groundbreaking ceremony on March 28th, and all council members will receive an invitation to this.
Are there any questions? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why so late for the groundbreaking ceremony, or for the official dig? How's that? Because they are moving dirt right now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the date was provided by the OPP. That was the date that their dignitaries were all able to come and attend.
Proceed.
And it was also something that was requested through the OPP.
Proceed, Brian.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chair, is this not a county building? Is this not the Brant County Police Services building, and are we not the landlord? And that's my comment. You don't have to answer it.
Okay, the question has been answered, and rather than, I don't know whether you want to respond to that. If you do, then I don't think it's necessary. That's what I'm getting at. So if you want to speak, if you have a question, she's available, but if you want to question the question, that's not really allowed. Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the general manager. The groundbreaking or the dirt that's being moved out there currently,
Again, Joan,
this is my question to the general manager.
just let me conclude before you interrupted me for interrupting you, and I apologize for that. But if someone has a question, it's unnecessary to discuss the question. If you have another question, that's fine. So propose your question.
We did not, as a committee, know that that was going to happen when it did. And is that correct? And we were told back in December, were we not, that we needed a 3-month lead time for groundbreaking?
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. You're trying to defend.
I
so
just
think
wanted
it's
to make
understood.
that clear.
And that wasn't a question, and that's why I told you they had a question. Ask
It
the
was a question, but Cindy doesn't have to answer if she doesn't want to.
Let's just move on. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Cindy. Development Services. We have a staff report and a recommendation. In order to put the report on the floor, would someone feel confident in moving the recommendation? Moved by Brian. Do I have a seconder? Steve? Before I call the question, are there any questions with regard to the report? And Rob is here to answer the questions if there are any. Mark?
Through you, I have 2 questions that are actually questions, and I'm hoping for an answer. One, on the policy 2.2.6 around housing, would you be able to explain in a little more detail or using an example, if the talk about density and the takeouts of cemeteries and employment space, if that means we'll be allowed to be more dense or less dense?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just thinking here, I would suggest that by adding the areas like cemeteries and what was the other one that got added?
Employment land.
Yeah, employment lands calculations. I would suggest that overall, the county would be less dense because those are now takeouts. We don't have to include those lands as areas that we have to intensify. Pretty difficult, I think you'd agree, to intensify a cemetery, for example. But I think overall, it would result in us being less dense.
Okay, and then on the next one, 2.2.8, it says here in your report, the settlement boundary expansion should still avoid prime agricultural areas. Are you saying that as a hope that we will avoid, or that they will avoid with the new policy as you read it?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not saying anything. This is what the province is saying. This is what this report is in kind of response to what the province is proposing. So everything that's before you is kind of responses to that.
So should is not will.
I agree. But I believe that that's the wording that the province has given us. So that's, I think that if there's any comfort that gives people, it is what it is.
Okay, and my last question, it's brief, but like we had the opportunity with Bill 66, where the province was essentially trying to grant powers and we could not, we weren't compelled to use them.
Yes.
Are we as a council compelled to use these powers, or could a developer kind of push us, not push us, but force through an LPAT or something us to utilize these new powers, or can we choose not to use these powers as a council, local governing body?
I'll answer the council side. Council can choose to do that or not. The question with respect to the development industry, that was a question that was posed to the province at the session we had last week, and that I think is a very good question. Can a developer request that this type of application come forward? And we have not got an answer on that yet.
Did you have a question, Steve? Okay. Are there any other questions? Any comments with regard to the report before I call the question? Then I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thanks, Rob. And as I said before, there is no general manager update from the development services. That takes us to the strategic initiatives. And there is a recommendation and a report. Would someone move that to put it on the floor? Mayor David, seconded by Brian. Are there any questions to the report or the recommendation? Are there any comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And our general manager is unable to be with us here this evening, but she sent a competent and capable replacement in Russell Press, who is going to give the general manager's update.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Economic development strategy, just a couple quick updates that Allison's asked me to provide this evening. The strategy is in its final phase of preparation with a consultant and should be ready to go within a number of weeks. The Downtown Paris Master Plan, the final public consultation will happen in the next month or two. Communications and Marketing Division, they're busy working on the year-end reports for the department. And in the tourism area, the Special Event Coordinator is busily pulling together the 2019 events calendar for the annual Good Times and Brand event guide. That's the report, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for filling in so admirably. Now we'll move to the next item, and that's the Office of the CAO. Committee members, there are 3 recommendations listed. I'm going to do it this way. Would someone move that the recommendations in the section be the reports we received and the recommendations be approved, and then I'm going to vote on them separately. It's moved by Mark and seconded by Steve. Before I call the question on the first one, are there any questions? Questions?
Question on the first one. We did our own research. We have our own technology people do our research. We have our own information on that. I don't feel that we need someone
Okay,
else's opinion.
again,
We had
it's
our
a
own.
question, rather, I'll get to comments in a minute, but if you have a question of clarification.
Did we not, question through you, Mr. Chair, or CAO, did we not do our own research?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we did do research for part of when we were in the hearing, and then CCOB continued with the hearing to a much longer phase and did additional research. So that's the basis of my recommendation.
Any other questions? Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the CAO. So the research that they did was more extensive, was it? And could be, as I believe I read in your report, useful to us in the future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, the CCOB went through the full hearing in order to prepare their experts for the hearing to be able to make arguments to support their case. They did extensive research, and as my report said, that research could have value for us in the future, and it would be worth obtaining.
Are there any comments before I call the question on F1? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. The second one, the strategic planning process. Are there any questions on the report or the recommendation setting out a strategic planning process, which is probably one of the more important things we'll be doing in the next short while? Any questions? Any comments? Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item that was on the report that was titled here it is here. On page 363, it mentions on that strategic plan the 2 business parks that we were going to develop. Will the new strategic plan bring forward, because Brant is finished and Sharp Road is gone, some new ideas or suggestions for industrial areas that we can start on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't want to preclude what the outcome of the new strategic plan will be. That would be something that would come out of the dialogue with the public and with councils. But I think there's a good chance, but I wouldn't want to preclude that.
Okay, yeah.
Are there any
I
other,
guess that's very strategic. Thank you.
Are there any comments before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That motion's carried. And the housekeeping amendments, are there any questions there? Any comments? All those in favor of that one? Opposed? Those reports are, and recommendations are adopted and carried. Now the CAO's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few items. I wanted to mention the Brant Community Health Hub. It's a project that I continue to work on. We have closed an RFP for an architect. We received 13 respondents. Most of them are a couple hundred pages each, so we are working through those. Myself and Ms. Hayward over at BME are doing that, as well as I've asked one of the doctors from the family health team to have a look through those as well. So we have a bit of some healthcare professional attention at that. I wanted to mention, as part of that RFP, we included a design, innovation, and unique solutions request for information, including LID solutions and low-impact development solutions, and we have received good response from a number of the proponents with low-impact development solutions for that site, which I think is good, and that's something we're including in most of our RFPs going forward per council's direction. So I want to talk about the Kentucky Fried Chicken building, the KFC building, and so for those of the previous members of council, you recall, we did have an agreement of purchase and sale to buy that building. It was a long closing, allowing the KFC to move on. The KFC the KFC did not own that building; they were a tenant in it. So the county took ownership of that property at the end of January, as per the agreement of purchase and sale we signed way back in December of 2017. So it was a clean closure, and the building was vacated by the KFC restaurant late in 2018. And I'll be bringing a report forward in March on what we're proposing to do with that building in the short term, so you can stay tuned for that. I can't provide any information on where the KFC went. I know that's where everyone is thinking. So, and I just wanted to mention Alison Newton. She's not with us this evening. She's under the weather. But she did last week, 2 weeks ago, finish her term as president of the Economic Developers of Ontario. It's a 60-year-old plus organization with over 1,000 members representing economic development professionals across the province. Their mandate is advocacy, education, networking, and industry evolution. And Alison, for the last year, has served as their president. She's been a member of that organization for, I believe, 8 years. So I wanted to extend my congratulations, and I'm sure council would join me in that, to Alison for that achievement. And I know she was quite relieved from that extra burden. It's a lot of work, and I commend her for keeping her day job down and doing that on weekends. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my report.
Any questions to CAO? Okay, then let's proceed onward. Communications, there are none. Matters referred by council, there aren't any. There is no other business. There is an in-camera document, it's just minutes, so that's been approved prior. So unless there's any questions about the minutes, we don't need to go into camera to ask questions if there are none. And that takes us to the next meeting, which is Monday, March the 11th, here at 7 o'clock, and that takes us to the adjournment, and I would declare the meeting adjourned.